the video before we take off. How are the boys? Are they still sleeping?
If your partner fell into the ocean right in front of you, what would you do? That is not a trick question. It is the question that Carly Aylesworth has been asking publicly since the night she found out her mother was gone. And it is the question that her stepfather's account of that night cannot cleanly answer. Not because he said nothing, but because of the specific things he said and the specific things he did not do. He is a former Marine, a man who has been on the water for over a decade, a man who, by his own account, watched his wife go into the ocean on a dark night in the Bahamas and then, he says, because the wind was too strong to row against, paddled in the opposite direction, 4 miles, 8 hours, and called his stepdaughter the following evening in a tone she described to every journalist who would listen as monotone and relaxed. Lynette Hooker has not been found. The search shifted from rescue to recovery within days. 2 separate law enforcement agencies have opened criminal investigations. Her husband has been arrested, questioned, and released, still uncharged, still denying everything. And her daughter is still talking, still in front of cameras, still asking the question that started all of this. What she said and what she knew is what this video is about. Look at her. Really look at her. That is a woman who built the life she wanted from scratch, sold the house, bought a boat, named it the Soulmate, and spent the better part of a decade sailing across the Gulf of Mexico, down into the Bahamas, through waters that most people only ever see in travel magazines. All of it documented, all of it shared, all of it looking exactly like what she said it was. A love story, an adventure, a choice that paid off. Her last post before she disappeared was a photo of boats resting in glassy water. The caption said she was not going anywhere for a while. Within days, she was gone. Reported missing in the Bahamas on a dark stretch of water late at night. Her husband the only witness. Her daughter, 1,000 miles away, getting a phone call that stopped making sense the longer she listened to it. What that daughter said publicly after that call, in interview after interview, in front of investigators, in front of the cameras, is what this video is about. Because she did not just express grief, she said something specific. Something that opened a door this investigation has not been able to close. Whether you believe her account or her stepfather's depends entirely on which version of this marriage you think was real. And today, we are going to walk through all of it. The night, the evidence, the history, the questions, and the words of a daughter who has decided that silence is not something she is willing to offer. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old, from a small town in Lenawee County, Michigan. She and her husband Brian had been married for roughly 25 years, and somewhere in the middle of that marriage, they made a decision that most people talk about and never actually do. They sold their home, bought a yacht, and moved onto the water full-time, named the boat the Soulmate, and began documenting every mile of it on social media. The YouTube channel was called The Sailing Hookers. The Instagram account ran alongside it. Between the two, they built an audience watching them move through Louisiana, Florida, the Gulf of Mexico, and eventually into the Bahamas. 2 people who had traded a fixed address for open water and seemed, from everything they posted, to have no regrets about it. Lynette cooked aboard the boat in a solar oven. She snorkeled with sea turtles. She filmed sunrises and called the ocean her happy place. And the way she moved through those videos made it easy to believe her. Her daughter, Carly Aylesworth, was 28 years old and from a previous relationship. Brian was her stepfather, not her biological father. She described her mother as her #1 supporter, the person she called first when anything went wrong. Carly lived far away from wherever the Soulmate was anchored at any given time, but the distance between them was not emotional. That part was close, always. What Carly also knew, and what the social media account never captured, was the other version of that marriage. Not the sunrises and the sea turtles and the captions about living their best life, but the conversations her mother had with her in private. The things Lynette confided that never made it into a post. The parts of that relationship that existed in the space the camera was not pointed at. That is the version of this story that matters. And it begins with a Saturday evening in April, at a waterside restaurant in Hopetown in the Bahamas that started the way any other dinner might and ended in a way nothing should. By the time April 4, 2026 arrived, Brian and Lynette had been in the Bahamas for about a month. They were navigating the Abaco Islands the way they navigated most places, slowly, comfortably, at their own pace. That Saturday evening, they had dinner at the Abaco Inn in Hopetown, a small waterside restaurant that sits between the Atlantic on one side and a sheltered cove on the other. By all accounts, a normal evening, nothing that stood out to anyone who saw them. When dinner was done, they got into their dinghy, a small 8-foot hard-bottom motorboat they used routinely to travel between the shore and their anchored yacht. The plan was straightforward, a 2.5-mile crossing to Elbow Cay, where the soulmate was waiting. They left Hopetown at approximately 7:30 in the evening. That is the last moment that anyone other than Brian Hooker can place Lynette Hooker alive. What Brian told authorities happened next is as follows. Conditions deteriorated after they left. The winds picked up. The water turned choppy. At some point during the crossing, he says, Lynette fell overboard. She went into the water with the engine's safety lanyard on her, the ignition mechanism that cuts the motor when the operator leaves the helm. And without it, the engine shut off immediately. He says he tried to reach her. He says the current was too strong. He says he last saw her swimming in the direction of shore. He drifted 4 miles in the opposite direction toward Marsh Harbor, unable to row against the wind. He beached the dinghy. He made his way on foot through the bush to the Marsh Harbor boat yards. He called for help. By the time authorities were contacted, it was approximately 4 in the morning. Roughly 8.5 hours had passed since the couple left the Abaco Inn. A search began immediately. The Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue, the U.S. Coast Guard conducted aerial searches. Drones and divers worked the surrounding waters for days. By Tuesday, officials confirmed the operation had shifted from rescue to recovery. Lynette had not been found. As of this recording, she still has not been found. Brian has maintained the same account since the morning he reported her missing. His attorney stated publicly that he is heartbroken, that he has been cooperating fully with investigators, and that drawing conclusions about foul play in the absence of a body is premature. Brian himself posted on Facebook the morning of his arrest that he had made desperate attempts to reach her, that the currents had driven them further apart, and that finding Lynette was his sole focus. He has not been charged with any crime and denies all wrongdoing. His stepdaughter heard a different version of events, and the way she heard it, the tone, the timing, the words, is what turned this from a tragic accident into something investigators and a family cannot walk away from. Carly Aylesworth found out her mother was missing the night after it happened. Not the morning it was reported, not when the search began, the following evening, Sunday, around 8 or 8:30 p.m. Brian Hooker called his stepdaughter to tell her that Lynette had been gone since the night before. He gave her the account. He told her what happened on the water. He said what he had done and what the search teams were doing, and then, before she had fully absorbed what she was hearing, the call ended. After that clip, consider what she just described. Not what he said, but how. The tone she used to describe his tone. The way she sat with it afterward and found herself asking a question she has not been able to stop asking since. She has repeated it in every interview since that phone call, because it is the question this whole case keeps returning to. In the days that followed, Brian left her a voicemail. He told her that Search and Rescue had recovered a flotation device from the water, one he said he had thrown to Lynette after she went in. He said search teams could now narrow their area. He said they were still out there looking. The voicemail, which Carly later shared with news organizations, was listened to by reporters and described as calm. Carly hired an attorney. She began speaking publicly, and what she brought into those conversations was not just grief, it was a specific body of knowledge about her mother's marriage that she had been sitting with for years and had never expected to need to say out loud. From the first interview to the most recent, Carly Aylesworth has said the same things. She has not escalated, she has not changed her account. She has sat in front of cameras and investigators and said what she knows, what she was told, and what she believes, and she has been careful every time to separate those three things. What she knows, her mother was an experienced sailor. Lynette Hooker had been on the water for over a decade. She grew up near lakes. She swam. She snorkeled. She knew how to handle herself on a boat. The idea of her simply falling overboard in a way she could not recover from is something Carly told reporters she has a hard time accepting, given everything she knows about who her mother was on the water. What she was told, her mother confided in her, privately, that Brian had choked her. This allegation has not been independently confirmed by law enforcement, and Brian Hooker's attorney has denied it on his behalf. Carly also told journalists that there was a history of threats, specific threats, of a specific nature that she says her mother shared with her over the years. She was measured in how she described these things. She did not embellish them. She said what she was told and attributed them clearly to her mother. What that clip carries is not anger. That is the part that stays with people who watch it. She is not performing outrage. She is describing a private history that she never expected to make public, in a measured voice, because she believes it is relevant to what happened on the night of April 4th. Whether you agree with that conclusion or not, what she is describing, and the consistency with which she describes it, is something investigators have taken seriously enough to spend 2 hours interviewing her. She also addressed the broader pattern of the relationship. She said the marriage was volatile in ways that were connected to drinking. She said the couple had a history of serious conflict when alcohol was involved. She did not claim this was constant or that there was no love in the marriage. She was specific about that. She said they cared for each other. She also said that what she witnessed and what her mother told her do not add up to the image the social media account presented.
She said she does not want anything bad to happen to Brian. She said she hopes this was a freak accident. She said she can live with that if it is proven to be true. But she said she will not let it be swept under the rug before a proper investigation reaches that conclusion. Every interview she has done has ended in the same place, not with accusation, but with a request, a full investigation, the truth wherever it leads. What Carly described in those interviews did not exist only as private family knowledge. In February 2015, more than a decade before Lynette disappeared in the Bahamas, there was an incident in Michigan that produced a police report, a document that multiple news organizations independently obtained and reported on as part of their coverage of this case. The Kentwood Police Report documents a domestic dispute between Brian and Lynette Hooker. Brian told the responding officer that Lynette had struck him in the face multiple times. He was found with a swollen, bloody nose. Lynette, who the officer noted was highly intoxicated, told police that Brian had struck her in the forehead and had choked her. No visible injuries on Lynette were documented at the scene that night. Lynette was placed in custody on suspicion of assault and battery. A prosecutor later reviewed the case, determined there was insufficient evidence to establish who had started the altercation, and brought no charges against either person. The case was dismissed. That is the full record. It does not tell us who the aggressor was because the officer could not determine it, and neither could the prosecutor. What it does tell us is that in 2015, Lynette Hooker told a police officer her husband had choked her. That is the same allegation her daughter says her mother confided to her in the years that followed. The consistency of that detail, across a decade, across 2 very different settings, is something people following this case have not been able to set aside. A forensic nursing expert who spoke to journalists about this case noted, without specific reference to any individual, that strangulation within a domestic relationship is taken seriously as a lethality indicator in these types of investigations. That is not a conclusion about Brian Hooker. It is a clinical observation about the significance of the pattern being described, one that investigators themselves would be aware of when reviewing the history of this relationship alongside the circumstances of Lynette's disappearance. Brian Hooker's attorney has disputed the characterization of the marriage as violent. She has said publicly that Brian denies the allegations made by Carly Aylesworth specifically, and that public assumptions about the outcome of this investigation are premature and potentially harmful to fair proceedings. That is a legitimate legal position, and it is included here because Brian Hooker has not been charged with anything, and that matters.
Beyond the history of the relationship, there are questions about the night itself that investigators and family members have focused on closely. questions that Brian Hooker's account does not comfortably resolve, even when taken at face value. The first is the ignition lanyard. Brian told authorities that when Lynette went into the water, she took the engine safety mechanism with her, the device that cuts the motor when the operator leaves the helm. Without it, the engine shut off immediately. The question that people have raised is straightforward. Under what ordinary circumstances would the person not steering the boat be the one holding the ignition key? The second is the direction he moved in. Brian says the wind was too strong to row back to where Lynette went in. The conditions were 18 to 22 knots, according to the fire and rescue team on scene. He drifted 4 miles in the opposite direction. He is a former Marine. He has been sailing for over a decade. Carly told reporters that a former Marine who was an experienced sailor paddling away from the spot where his wife fell into the ocean without going in after her is something she cannot make sense of. The third is the phone. A telecommunications expert confirmed that cell phone reception is plausible, even if intermittent, over the 4.5-mile channel Brian paddled that night. Carly said the couple typically carried their phones while on the water. Whether Brian had access to a working phone during those 8.5 hours, and if so, who he did or did not contact, is something authorities were examining. The fourth is the call to Carly. Brian reported Lynette missing in the early hours of Sunday morning. He did not call his stepdaughter until Sunday evening, more than 12 hours later. He had spoken to police, the search was already underway, and the person who would describe Lynette as her closest person found out nearly half a day after the fact, in a call that Carly described as matter-of-fact, ending before she could ask the questions that began forming the moment she understood what she had just been told. None of these points individually constitute proof of anything. Brian's attorney has made that argument consistently, and she is not wrong. What they constitute together is a picture that does not resolve cleanly into the account his attorney has offered on his behalf. That is why there is a criminal investigation. That is why there was an arrest. That is why his detention was extended. Not because conclusions have been reached, but because the questions have not been answered. On the morning of Wednesday, April 8th, 4 days after Lynette disappeared, Brian Hooker posted on Facebook. He said he was heartbroken. He said he had made desperate attempts to reach her. He said that finding Lynette was his sole focus. By that evening, the Royal Bahamas Police Force had taken him into custody in Marsh Harbor. The Royal Bahamas Police Force Assistant Commissioner confirmed publicly that Brian was arrested for additional questioning based on probable cause. He was not charged. His attorney confirmed he was cooperating and continued to deny any wrongdoing. During the questioning that followed, Brian was confronted directly with the allegations his stepdaughter had made, and, according to his attorney, he disputed them. A magistrate approved an extension of his detention under Bahamian law, which allows a further 72 hours of questioning when an investigation is incomplete. Brian remained in custody through at least Monday evening of the following week. On the same day as the arrest, the U.S. Coast Guard formally opened a criminal investigation into Lynette's disappearance and interviewed Carly for 2 hours. The State Department confirmed it was providing consular assistance and working alongside Bahamian officials. The soulmate was examined by investigators while moored near shore in Marsh Harbor. What, if anything, that examination produced has not been disclosed publicly. A former FBI investigator who commented publicly on the case noted that the absence of a body makes building a criminal prosecution significantly more difficult. What investigators would need to establish is a case built on circumstantial evidence, communications, device data, search history, financial records, witness accounts, and internal inconsistencies of the story being offered. None of that work has been made public. What has been made public is an arrest, an extended detention, and a criminal investigation that multiple agencies are now part of. Brian Hooker has not been charged. He denies all wrongdoing. His attorney has maintained that from the first statement to the most recent one, and that position has not shifted. The social media account is still up. The videos are still there. And if you watch them without knowing any of what we have covered in this video, they read exactly the way they were meant to read. 2 people who found each other, found the water, and built something worth documenting. Lynette laughing, the two of them moving through the world together looking like they have everything figured out. Every video is a choice about what to include. Every caption is a choice about what to say. The life that exists inside those frames is real, and so is the life that existed outside them. Carly Aylesworth watched both versions from close up for years. She knows the difference between them, and she has spent the weeks since her mother disappeared making sure that the version the public does not see is part of the official record. Lynette's own mother was racing to get an emergency passport to fly to the Bahamas when she heard about the arrest. She told the Associated Press she was glad Brian had been taken in for questioning. She said the family had many unanswered questions. She said they were still holding on for a positive outcome. That phrase carries a particular weight when it comes from a mother who raised a daughter near the water her entire life, who knows what that daughter was capable of on the water, and who is still, despite everything, holding on.
One person watching the case online wrote that what struck them most was not the inconsistencies in the account, but the Instagram. The fact that Lynette's last post is still there, sitting in a feed that stopped updating the week she disappeared, captioned with the words she wrote about not going anywhere for a while. Something about that image, the stillness of it, the irony of it, has stayed with people in a way that the press conferences and the legal statements have not. That is what happens when a story is personal enough. The small details become the ones that carry the most weight. A caption, a boat name, a phone call made 12 hours too late. A daughter who keeps showing up and keeps asking the same question, calmly, without theatrics, because she has decided that calm is the only way to make sure people keep listening. As of April 12, 2026, Lynette Hooker has been missing for 8 days. She has not been found. Brian Hooker has been released from custody after extended questioning, has not been charged with any crime, and through his attorney continues to maintain that he is innocent and that his wife's disappearance was a tragic accident. The Royal Bahamas Police Force and the U.S. Coast Guard both have active criminal investigations into the case. The State Department remains engaged. Carly Aylesworth has set up a GoFundMe titled "Help Find and Honor My Missing Mom" to support the search and, if it comes to it, a memorial. She has given interviews to every major outlet that is asked. She was interviewed by the Coast Guard for 2 hours. She has an attorney. She is 28 years old and has been doing all of this while not knowing whether her mother is alive. She has not called for a conviction. She has not accused anyone of a specific crime in terms that go beyond what she has personally witnessed or been told. She has said she hopes this was an accident. She has said she can live with that answer if it is the true one. But she has also said, in every interview, without wavering, that she will not allow this to be resolved without a full investigation reaching that conclusion independently. The case turns on questions that only investigators currently have access to. Device records, communication logs, physical evidence from the scene and the vessel, and the full substance of what Brian Hooker said during questioning. None of that is public. What is public is a set of circumstances that 2 separate law enforcement agencies considered serious enough to warrant criminal investigations, and a set of allegations from a daughter that are consistent, specific, and corroborated in at least one documented respect by a police report that predates this case by more than a decade. What happened on that water on the night of April 4th is something only one person can describe from direct experience. Whether that description is the complete truth, and whether investigators can establish that one way or the other, is what this case now depends on. There is a particular kind of grief that comes with not knowing. It is different from the grief of loss, because loss has edges. It has a shape you can eventually learn to live around. Not knowing has no edges. It just keeps going. And that is where Carly Aylesworth has been living since the night of April 4th, in the space between what she fears happened and what she cannot yet confirm. She has used that space to do something, not to collapse into it, not to wait in it, but to speak into it, loudly and consistently, because she decided that keeping her mother's case visible was the most useful thing she could do from where she is standing. Lynette Hooker loved the ocean. She built her life around it. She documented it with a generosity that made strangers feel like they were part of something. Whatever the truth of what happened on that water turns out to be, she deserved to be the one still out there sailing it. If you want to support the family, Carly's GoFundMe is linked in the description. Subscribe if you want to be here when this case develops, and it will develop. Share this video if someone you know has been following the story. And leave your thoughts in the comments. Not theories built on nothing, but the kind of careful attention that keeps cases like this from fading. Lynette Hooker deserves answers. Her daughter has been fighting for them every single day. The least we can do is keep watching.